Hello and welcome to Deconfine. I'm Proiti, one of the curators of the festival, and I'm very glad to have with me today the artist Faisal Anwar, whose artwork Charbagh we have the privilege to feature on our exhibition, and curator Premjish Achari, who will interview him on the same. Thank you both for being here today. I'm very excited to introduce you. Faisal Anwar is an interactive new media artist and producer from Pakistan, currently living and working in Canada. His practice explores socio-political spaces which intrigues the mind and emotion through multiple layers of participatory experiences. A graduate of Canadian Film Centre Habitat Lab and National College of Arts, Lahore, his computational thinking and artistic practice branches through multiple media, including interactive installations, immersive environments, data-driven computing interventions, and internet art. His projects often bring together art, culture, and technology in an odd configuration to explore our perceptions towards private versus public places, surveillance, and social interactivity in modern urban cultures. He has showcased his work across the globe, including exhibitions at Canvas Gallery, Khoj, Harbourfront Centre, Aga Khan Museum, Toronto, Karachi Biennale, etc. Thank you so much, Faisal, for being here with us today and being part of Deconfine. Thanks a lot. Premjish Achari is a curator, writer, and translator based in New Delhi. His translations have appeared in publications by Sahitya Academy. He has initiated the independent curatorial platform called Future Collaborations, aiming at theoretically and politically informed curation. He has curated multiple exhibitions, for example, Workers and Farmers, a Panorama of Resistance, as part of the second edition of Future Collaborations at Khoj International Artists Association. In August 2017, he curated a preview to Desolation at the Italian Cultural Center. He has received the INLAC's Take on Art Travel Grant for Young Critics in 2016. He was a fellow at the Curatorial Intensive South Asia 2017 at Khoj. In 2018, he received the Art Scribes Award by Prameya Art Foundation for developing new curatorial paradigms, and as part of the award, he attended a residency in France. He is currently the Director of Outreach at Art First Foundation and also a visiting faculty member at Shiv Nadar University. Thank you so much for being here with us, Premjish. We're very, very glad to have you. And now, a little bit more about Charbagh, which is the artwork in focus. Charbagh is a mutating digital garden. This internet version of Charbagh was specially created for Deconfine, for which we are very thankful to you, Faisal. Earlier, it was a physical installation. The term Charbagh refers to the Persian or Islamic style quadrilateral garden divided by 4 walkways or flowing water into 4 smaller paths with axial paths intersecting at the garden's center. This highly structured geometrical scheme is a powerful metaphor for the organization and domestication of the landscape and a symbol of the socio-political territorialization process. Using the internet, open network data, and pattern geometry, Charbagh grows over time with incoming streams of large public data. For Deconfine, this festival, the data is collected from different cities and time zones through thematically curated hashtags via Instagram. Charbagh is much more than just an architectural form or a participatory artwork. It is a symbol of coexistence and sustainable living for contemporary times. The hashtags that were specially created for this festival aim to reflect on these issues, since this festival focuses on the changing nature of human-technology relationships. And these hashtags that we created together with Faisal are hashtag Charbagh Tech, Charbagh Heritage, Charbagh Community, and Charbagh Nature. Charpak gives us the opportunity to reflect on the many dimensions of tech. On one hand, the production of technology has led to environmental destruction in many cases. At the same time, technology can help us protect the environment, to spread awareness, and to build communities. I'm sure that the following discussion between Faisal and Premjish will be an extremely enriching one. I've had the opportunity to look at some of the questions and I'm really, really excited and I'm looking forward to it. Now it's time for me to join the audience and let you both have the floor. Thank you so much. And if you could take it up from here.
Yeah. Thank you, Praiti. And I use this opportunity to thank you and Khayal, and also congratulate you for Deconfine, the first edition, I think, of the Deconfine Festival. Wonderful effort, and I hope that the effort continues and expand the discussion on the role of digital and on the influence of digital in contemporary art too. And also a very interesting and very important what you call trajectory which you have charted out to map the digital art in South Asia. And I wish all the best for you guys in
Thank
that
you.
venture too.
Thank you.
And thank you, Faisal, for joining us today. And very, what you call, enriching and enchanting to see the wonderful exhibition you have kind of conceptualized. And also the interactive dimensions of that is very unique and very fascinating. We will discuss about that. And before that, I thought it would be good to kind of contextualize the general scenario of the digital in art or the digital art, and also the data visualization, which is becoming a trend in contemporary art too. There is no doubt that you will also agree with me that we are currently living in the era of big data, where massive amounts of information are being collected, and you're also using such a strategy to collect information and also a kind of project or use it or mediate it into something else in an aesthetic manner. Every Facebook, every Twitter and Instagram account posts data, and that can be archived, and it becomes part of a historical data set. Through your project, what I was thinking is that one could also enter to assess the impact of digital technologies in the art world. On the way artists are taking the torrent of big data that is being produced and also transforming it into works of art. Now, this is very interesting. This is a remarkable shift which is happening across the world. In the age of big data, which we are living in, a new aesthetic trend has begun to emerge in the art world. With a constant inflow of raw data being created, a collection of artists like you have been transforming these numbers into abstract aesthetic forms. Sometimes the work functions as a commentary on the world we live in, and other times what happens is the data is pushed into such a surreal form. It becomes an experience unto itself. We know that art is the product of technology since time immemorial. Various sorts of technologies have influenced art. And the digital technology is the latest one in that context. And when we look at the big data and its use, the simplest iteration of data as art comes in the field of data visualization. Infographics, pie charts, histograms are all ways people have compiled data into visual form, helping us to understand and contextualize often difficult information, which is difficult to grasp for the common man. But the line between a straightforward information conveyance and art is frequently blurred by many artists who create beautiful and compelling forms of data visualization, like what you have done in your project. But this is also an important time to recollect that the distinction between data presentation and data art is very vague in contemporary. Still, we have not set the binary as such, and I don't know whether we need such a binary too. But the art world is still struggling to separate the two. So against this background of these particular texts, these particular contexts, and these particular what you call problems, and also the phenomena of global connectivity and the proliferation of data that stems inevitably from it, I see Charbagh as an attempt to visualize humongous volumes of data and create a playful, interactive, intangible, big data experience through interactive installation artwork. I think Charbagh responds to our data saturated culture. That is what I feel about Charbagh. And to begin with, Faisal, I would like to know from you the process behind this particular project. And if you could explain it to the viewers, how people could participate in this project, as I said earlier, the process behind it, and how the element of interactivity and participation is very essential in the project and also generally in your practice. And why is that important? And what is the relevance of these strategies? If you could explain.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you so much. I would just quickly thanks Pranoti for such an interesting initiative to talk about the digital art and the sensibility of the interactivity which is happening in contemporary times, and all her work and bringing all of us together to have these conversations. So thank you so much. So I think I'll just quickly go back a little bit, how I reached to the Charpak, and I think there's a little history behind it, and I think that can set up the context really well, and then I can talk about how people can interact with it as well. So in 2008 and 9, I was as part of the Banff New Media residency, I was trying to explore the idea of time zones, because I moved from Pakistan to Canada. So I have this, shift of time, which was really interesting for me. And then looking at these architectural spaces and these dialogues, which is happening around um, different cultures, how to reach out to someone, um, figuring out a strategy of connecting these different spaces together. So I did some series of work in 2008, 2009. Some of them projects were odd spaces where I was traveling between Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan, and developing these gallery-based real-time connectivity between these spaces. At that time, I used non-tech sort of engagement, so using just a pen and a clipboard, where you can try to connect with someone through these different countries, and then sort of moving forward, I was sort of always curious about these collaborative nature of these ideas, right? So the next iteration of that work was a tweet garden, which was a tree. It was an animated tree, and each leaf is a wish or a prayer, which the audience generate through using their cell phones, using their SMS messages, using their Twitter accounts. 140 characters used to be 140 characters at that time. And I was trying to understand how I can connect, how I can engage a diverse audience from different time zones, collaborating with a piece, with an artwork, with their own time zones, but in a collaboration, working together to create these trees or these gardens, which becomes an interesting metaphor of, connectivity with, digitizing a very significant and I would say a relationship we have with the nature, So using that type of metaphor into the work. And what I was hoping to create these odd encounters, what I call, right? I mean, imagine you're standing on an elevator, and you spend 10 seconds to 15 seconds in an elevator, and there's always someone standing right next to you. And most of the time, these are strangers spending those 10 seconds with you. And we have those odd moments in those spaces where mostly we don't know what to do. There's these tension which exist in those spaces. And I was just fascinated by these odd encounters in public spaces, in urban spaces, right? And the idea of knowing to a culture, idea of knowing to someone where you have no idea, you have hard to understand few things, and how we kind of come up with these understanding about knowing what we call others, and what are those tensions and cultural tensions which exist in these spaces. So Charpak is sort of an iteration looking at these experimental interventions, right? And as technology is growing, technology is bringing more perspective into how we relate. Right now, there are no borders exist anymore, virtual borders, right? We are all living in these digital world. Open confessions, open prayers, open anxieties, open opinions are running across the board all the time, right? There's this certain sensibility of empowerment, these illusions, if you may call, or delusions, if you may call, that we feel we are contributing consistently in a dialogue. So I think these are a really interesting shift which is happening. And as an artist, I see these. I see them as a medium for me to express and work with them, right? So this whole idea of consistent engagement, right, with the Charpak. So you use your cell phone, you relate with the question or a hashtag, and then you try to find to respond to it using a hashtag and a question, which kind of become an audience participation with the work, and then it grows and becomes these large data sets. One thing which I'm really interested in looking into different data variables in the work. As you talk about the data visualization, or that becomes a really interesting sort of a metaphor for a lot of artists who are working with the data sets right now. Last year I was invited, or I was part of this residency at Amazon rainforest, and the idea was to work with scientists and artists and curators to really understand the climate crisis and the impact it's having with the environment we are living in, right? So going back to your idea of, when the data becomes analytic, when it becomes meaningful, and I think for me, it has these different tangible ways to connect with different audience. So in the case of climate crisis, so I was collaborating with these scientists, and they're accumulating data for the past 15 years or even more than 15 years trying to understand the migration pattern changes in the birds. And I thought it's such an interesting data sets to work with, right? To understand what is happening. And in the in the science sort of terminology, or in their space, they have their own lingo. They have their own spreadsheets, their own graphs to talk about the data sets. And I found that's such a fascinating gap where potentially those data sets are not reaching out to us. And potentially that's the reason we are still trying to figure out, is it real? The climate crisis is real, or it's not there anymore. So I thought it's an interesting gap, which potentially, if we bring art and design and technology together, we can start developing some ideas to make it more meaningful for the audience in that context. I know it's a lot bigger answer to your question, but I hope this gives you some perspective.
No, that was required, and thank you for elaborating it so patiently. And also, what was fascinating in what you said is the imagination of the borderless virtual world, the ideal society in which we are not what you call inhibited and controlled by the restrictions of the nation and the national, but where we are all bound together by information sharing is the constant of that particular world. And also, I'm also glad that you mentioned the collaborative aspect of your practice, which is again a very important strategy in contemporary art, especially where you are working on these projects, where you are constantly involved with scientific data or any sort of data, in not in order to kind of turn it into an artwork, but in order to visualize it aesthetically. And I think there is a fundamental difference here, which the artworks are taking. It's not merely making an aesthetic object. It is using data to meaningfully, aesthetically present data. There is a difference here. Faisal, I was also going through a lot of interviews, a lot of articles about Charpak, and also generally about your practice and your interest and your own of new media practices. And constantly I was reading about the positive take about technology in your practice and also in your statements, which was also reflected slightly early on. Uh, uh, so my question in this context is, where is the space for criticality about technology in this approach? Also, I see this project where data is abstracted rather than made easily legible for the public. It's not easily what you call understood like an infographics or anything like that. It is abstracted into patterns. But it also reminded me of what this contemporary artist Laurie Frick, who also works on data, she has said that, and I quote her, in all of these patterns, I do think there is an essential idea of who we are. And I think all these patterns reflect that, who we are and what we are, where we are. There's a lot of reflection, there's a lot of stamp on these patterns. A number of artists, scholars, and curators also believe that working with this data isn't just a matter of reducing human beings into numbers, but it is also about achieving a greater awareness of complex matters in a modern world. So what do these patterns reveal to us in Charpak? What are these patterns? And also, what is the reason for your positive outlook about technology?
Yeah, no, thanks. This is a really interesting question. I'll try to capture it in a coherent answer here. So I think, first of all, this is the first time I'm presenting Charpak without a physical space, right? It's right now you experience it through um, a browser, right? In your own space. And that was an interesting, really interesting shift for me as well, because I generally Charpak or all my work has a sensibility with the space as well. And the moment you bring in the site specific relevance with the data, and when you instantly bring a space context with the work and with the audience, it just changes the perception of the the work altogether, right? The symbology of these colors, the symbology of these patterns, the symbology of um, um, how the audience are interacting with the work in a real-time situation in a space versus sitting on your own on your computer and experiencing the work changes entirely the relevance of these symbologies. So I think that was an interesting um, shift or a learning for me as well, right? How it just completely uh, uh, put it out of the context, right? Now it becomes these luminance, these screen, and you're just watching a screen rather than experiencing a space. So that's the one thing which I think is an interesting shift. Um, Particularly in the context of Charbagh, I was working with the Aachen Museum in Toronto, and if you know the building in the architectural building, it's stunning. But they adapted this Charbagh structure, the traditional Charbagh structure from South Asia, Asian countries, and sort of make it a really interesting contemporary spin to it. Um, and and I was just curious about this binary nature of these architectural buildings, these gardens, with these Mughal gardens or Persian gardens. Even in Japanese gardens, you see these binary sort of structures, a very grid-oriented structures, and I was just fascinated by those. Um, and while I was doing more research and understanding about these architectural spaces, I was drawn towards the idea of tile making, which is also part of these buildings, these architectures, right? And the whole sensibility and cultural relevance of how we conceive those tiles, what are the colors, how they come together, and they have these regional and sometime a unique craft associated with that, right? And those sort of start those impacts on the design of the tiles, the making of the tiles, the relationship between colors on those tiles, and these palettes become my inspiration for Charbagh, right? So I was looking at these binaries in the data and looking at these cultural binaries which exist, in different cultural, different symbologies, and if you look at all of that, it sort of puts me into this interesting sort of experimental zone to understand if we combine an architectural sort of structure um, and combine these patterns of tile making and create these real-time algorithms who are consistently evolving based on what we are saying or what we are talking, um, potentially can bring a whole new perspective to my work. And that's why I was using these colors and formation of colors and tile making into that in Charpak. Another, I would say, perspective is, which I was very curious, is, think about the gap which is getting so big right now. If you look at U.S. elections, it's an interesting shift which is happening between right and left, right? I think, and it's happening across the board, across the world, right? Um, it's hard for us to connect anymore on ideas, in my opinion, right? There's a tendency, as we all evolved into something so vulnerable, so rigid in our perceptions and ideas, that this social space is giving us this illusion of, you know, I'm not interested in what you're saying, you're not interested in what I'm saying. And it becomes this perpetual social, I would say, new style of conversation. Look at our media, look at our news, look at the way the Facebook, the Twitter, and all these social platforms are filled with hate, filled with confusions, filled with this idea of not believing in something. The whole idea of what is real, what is fake. It's all these ideas are coming into the play. So um, I feel the gap, and I feel the need to sort of talk about these, right? And I think we need to find a way to at least ask the right question. What is happening? Maybe we don't have the answer, and perhaps art is not about finding the answers. It's more about asking the question, and I think that's where that's where the initiate of the Charpak, or potentially more iteration in this work, will move us to that direction to find more questions.
That is very important, and also really like that it should open up more questions rather than trying to answer. And I think it is very critical to ask more questions at this stage rather than finding answers. Both are important, but I think the world is extremely reducing to not asking important questions. And I hope Charpak could facilitate that. And it becomes a platform to facilitate asking questions and make it relevant again.
Yeah,
So,
one thing I would add is the process of making the work, right? And I think
yeah.
and I think that becomes really interesting. You know, this concept of, the presentation of work is definitely something which we see and experience. But for me, I think the process making of the work is really interesting as well, and really important for me. Last year, I was working with climate crisis strategy put towards in Vancouver, and I was invited to exhibit Charpak there. So I was working with these different group of people, and we selected 4 different locations in the city, and we collaborate with the ecologists and with the community, and we were traveling to these locations, which is part of the workshops, and we are talking about the community relationship with the city, the community's relationship with the climate crisis, and how they are connecting and responding. What are their thoughts about how they see the climate crisis in their city, and what is their voice, right? So these become these really interesting workshops, these dialogues, which eventually lead towards the uh, final presentation of the work, which happened way back after 4 weeks. And I think I personally feel contemporary art, especially in the medium I'm working with, has this role to play, to generate a dialogue, to generate to connect people together, to at least have have a conversation around it, and then eventually it manifests into the work, which I feel is the more I see a shift happening, especially in the digital art, the collaboration, the dialogue creation, and developing these strategies where we are really talking about these ideas become a really important element.
Yeah. Hello, Faisal. I think we lost the last bit of what you were saying.
That's okay. I mean, I don't know where you lost me, but
Just the last piece. It's fine. It's fine.
yeah.
But I'm very glad that you brought the process, and you highlighted the process, which is very important, because I also think that this new collaborative exercise is also changing the popular perception about artistic processes, and artist as this alienated figure who only works in the studio, drenched in paint or clay and things like that, which is a very conventional idea of artist. And here we are looking at a different sort of artist, who is not only creating something different, but who is also involved in something different. The involvement of creating this thing is very different from the existing histories of art making. I think that is very crucial, and it's going to be also very crucial in the coming times. And I think it will also help to liberate artists from this very individualistic notion or alienated notion of artistic practice, and also allow them to kind of open up to collaboration. I think it will open up that possibility. Uh, Coming back to contemporary art, especially that deals with big data, and it has been used a great deal on data visualization practices. We are dealing with image making and information, even in Charpak too, and many such practices. There is a growing trend of expressing the information of data. And many scholars, many writers are calling it as the dawn of a new age, what we call as art in the age of ones and zeros, the binaries. So, do you think information is art? Or what is your take on the use of data and information as raw materials for artistic practices?
Yeah. So, Marshall McLuhan talks about in his book this idea of medium is the message. And when uh, the message which is getting projected through a medium changes our perception, and sometimes the medium itself is a message. And I think that's an interesting sort of conversation. And he was um, trying to predict the future, or the future of technology, or technologies back in 60s and 70s. And I I can still map his theory even today's time, right? And I look at what is the mediums I'm interested in or available with, right? And the sculptor has a clay to play with. Um, a musician has um, an instrument to play with. A visual artist has a canvas or a color or brushes to play with. And for me, looking at these contemporary mediums where the binary code, the digitization, the AI, the machine learning, the VR, the idea of visualization are a really interesting contemporary mediums, which resonates with me a lot, right? So I see them as a medium and an opportunity to express my ideas using these mediums, such as um, ability to visualize information in the context of Charpak. I fully agree with you that I think the information, so to speak, is a new form, which I personally resonate a lot, right? Because I see these shifts, these new behaviors changing in our perceptions, right? How we access the information and how we relate with the information and how we manipulate the information. These are all these different changes which is happening, so to speak. You know, think about this way: we are documenting our present, our past, and potentially predicting our own future in many ways, right? We are making these timelines. We are part of that modern history in the making, and which I think is really interesting. Not a historian, not someone who is having that expert knowledge about the medium, is sitting in his room trying to develop these historical perceptions and all that. We are all making this contemporary history. You look at your timeline, Facebook timeline, you can go back 10 years and understand what type of life you were living in, what type of data you were accumulating. And I think that information, that shift between static information towards a dynamic information is definitely, at least for me, is a really exciting medium to work with.
Yeah, I would not like to go back 10 years and expose the timeline. But yeah, it also reminded me of this other initiative. I think it's called the Google Passport, which allows people to look at what all information about you is there with Google, what all is compromised, what all is used and misused, and it creates what you call it creates a pattern, and it is converted into a passport and given to you as these minute patterns of information. So a lot of commendable works are happening, and the realm in which this is also happening is an intangible, immaterial realm. And this is where I want to bring in the aspect of physicality or the absence of physicality. And I'll share a quote with you about what the urban planner Kevin Lynch has said. And I quote him. He says that quality in a physical object, which gives it a high probability of evoking a strong image in any given observer. And it is highly influential, right? You know, or we all know Duchamp's fountain, that particular object, what it can do. It's the shape, the color, or arrangement which facilitates the making of vividly identified, powerfully structured, highly useful mental images of the environment. It might also be called legibility or perhaps visibility in a heightened sense, where objects are not only able to be seen, but are presented sharply and intensely to the senses. That is what physicality did. And you also, as an artist, as somebody who has engaged with physical artworks for a long time, from puppets to puppeteering to physical artworks. And how do you see this shift to the digital experience? Because I believe that in my discussions also with Prati and Khayal, we were discussing about how we are living in this time where there is a convergence of the digital and the physical, where objects themselves are becoming digital. A lot of the memorials, souvenirs, objects of affect, objects of memories, which we used to cherish, which we used to smell, touch, and kind of hide in our attics. Now we hide them in our folders. So, how do you see this shift towards immateriality or non tangibility?
Yeah, and I think that's an organic shift which is happening, and it's in the making, right? We'll see a lot more shift in next 5 to 10 years. Um, the moment the technology is even more resolved, even more accessible. The whole idea of object uh, making, I mean, I think the shift from an object making to making it more tangible object is is directly proportional to, I think, the evolution in the technology and the way we are perceiving it, right? I remember um, when the first controller came out back in the day, which allows us to play a game on a PS3 with your body as an interface, changes the way we perceive or changes the way we play games, right? So your body become an interface, and your body become part of an activity which is responding to to a game, right? And if we look at if we look at the evolution, the variable technology is pretty much available now in the fashion industry, in the consumer goods, the evolution which happens with the mobile itself. Right now we are carrying the full uh, pretty much full scale computer in our hands, with the ability to visualize the environment, ability to visualize these different real-time information in the form of QR code, in the form of all these possibilities. So eventually, I think, and then you see these whole new, um, um, artists who are creating these immersive environments, right, where the space becomes so immersive. All these idea of cognitive interfaces, all these idea of responsiveness of the work, which is the object is become now larger than life. It filled up the whole space, and then to immerse you into the experience is, I think, is an interesting, I would say, shift, because now we have possibilities to create these, right? Back in the day, I remember when we when the now we have these, now we are talking between different time zones through these video conferences, is a sign, it's exactly how it's going to impact us in these um, in these future possibilities moving forward.
Yeah, that's. Let's see where we land. What Alice in Wonderland we all land up in. I also look forward to that. Which brings me to the last question of today's session. When I heard the title itself, Charpak, which is such an evocative title, It's also a very important theological and spiritual idea. It also evokes memories of so many miniature paintings, so many of them, and so many architectural structures which are also related to South Asian and also Central Asian Islamic architecture too. Whereas your version of it is a space for discussion, interaction, and dialogue. The Charbagh, which you have created, it is envisioning the coming together of a community. Is this how you see Charbagh as, and also the future of the digital? Is this a kind of prophet Faisal coming and telling the world that this is the future, where we interact, where we communicate, where we are always together in the virtual? What is Charbagh for you?
Yeah, it is. I'll just give you an example of the young generation. A 2 years old kid right now is using these tablets, and they are getting. So I think to answer this question, I see there are two levels to it, right? Uh, the perception of today's and the perception of 10 years down the road, right? And the more I see, the more I can relate with it, that the audience, the generations who are going through these digitization from a very early age, their sensibility, how they're accessing information, how they're interacting with each other, how they're having a dialogue, is going to be a lot more different than us. And I think, yes, I definitely foresee a major shift in the next 10 years in how we are perceiving these information, how we are reacting with it. And, as an artist, I feel, technology is just a medium, right? It's just facilitate you to create an experience or generate a voice or try to resolve or try to ask a different question or sometimes answers. But if our generations are moving towards this digitization, so I definitely foresee ideas like Charbagh, ideas like Tweed Gardens, ideas like um, um, so many other artists who are doing amazing work. Farik, an artist from Turkey, is developing these machine hallucinations right now in New York, which is building up these immersive experience with 100 million public pictures and creating these immersive experience. Um, Project like Van Gogh immersive exhibition, which is in Toronto right now, is another sort of leading towards finding those digitized environments, which brings people together in an entirely different way. So yes, I think this is potentially is going to be one way to look at how we are generating information and connecting communities with it.
It's a hopeful thought, and it's a hopeful thought, and I too am enchanted by it, and I wish that more spaces open up with similar messages of democracy, of equality, of egalitarianism, of sharing, develop and get fostered around the world. I too wish for that. And I really congratulate you, sincerely congratulate you for creating such a space. And also thank you for joining today in the conversation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure talking to you, pleasure knowing you, and yeah, and thanks a lot.
Thank you to both of you. I speak for the audience. I'm sure I speak for the audience as well when I say that this was an extremely enriching experience and it gave us a lot of food for thought. And I would also think that a lot of what you discussed today will help us conceptualize future versions of Deconfine, future editions of Deconfine. I think that there's a lot of inspiration that we can find in this conversation and the ideas that you threw light on. I don't want to take up any more time. I just want to thank you both again, and of course, want to thank everyone who was listening today. And I encourage you to please go on deconfine.org, Charbag, to participate in Charbag, to witness Charbag, and of course, all the other artworks that we have and all the other conversations that we have, which will be available indefinitely on the website as well, even after the festival is over. Thank you once again to both of you, and I bid you good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think the recording, I mean, you can both